You're listening to Trek FM.
Hello and welcome to From There to Here, Trek FM's 50th anniversary rewatch of Star Trek, in which we look at all 729 episodes from beginning to end. I'm Mike.
And I'm a fake Brandon.
And today we're talking about two episodes of Star Trek, Voyager's The Omega Directive and Deep Space Nine's In the Pale Moonlight. So, let's get started with the Omega Directive. Brandon, would you want to give a synopsis of this episode?
So, the USS Voyager is flying along in the Delta Quadrant, and it hits a little snag by having all of its monitors break down and having the Lululemon symbol show up everywhere. And everybody tries on some funky pants. And after they try on their pants, they find that there's actually a really bad molecule around that must be destroyed, which rescinds the Prime Directive. And 7 of 9 knows everything about it, of course, because she's assimilated a whole bunch of Starfleet captains. The end.
Yeah, that's actually just the beginning, you know? I mean, that is a killer premise, and you're like, wow, this is really interesting. What is this? What's going on here? And then it goes to a place which is kind of next level, which is really, really fascinating, where 7 basically wants to find this molecule desperately and keep it because it is essentially the greatest representation of perfection which you can find in nature or something like that. And it is the thing which the Borg place above everything else, you know? And it becomes a spiritual journey for her. And I find that to be fascinating on so many levels. And I think that this episode is really, really good. What do you think?
This is right after Deadlock. This is my second favorite episode of Voyager. I love this episode. And like when I saw it for the first time, like it had such an impact on me. Like I watched it live when it aired. It had such an impact on me that my username for like just about everything is Omega Directive. So it's kind of funny, but
Interesting.
I think that this episode is absolutely fascinating, but the part that really grabs me right at the beginning is the fact that the Federation has this Omega Directive, which is the opposite of their Prime Directive. And that completely fascinates me, where they would have this, it's so important that it rescinds what you think is our most important directive, which is non-interference. Doesn't matter what else is going on. We have to come in as the Federation and wipe out whatever is going on. That's how bad this is. And I think that is fascinating, that they would completely bypass the Prime Directive in order to do that. We're going to come in guns a-blazing. How many times have we seen, you know, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? And so here they come, and for the Federation to come in and push people aside and say, no, we got to destroy this thing, I don't know, like that just boggles my mind. And I like to think about that as this episode is airing, is what if another captain came up with this? What if Jean-Luc Picard encountered an Omega molecule, right? What if Sisko did? Like Sisko would just punch the molecule, right? But what would Picard do?
Yeah, I mean it is a fascinating concept for sure, and it's interesting to see how she deals with it, and it is also very interesting to have Seven's perspective as that sort of counterpoint and saying like you're being short-sighted about this. Of course, Janeway definitely has a point in that she doesn't want to end civilization as we know it, but Seven also has a point in that that's maybe a narrow human view, and maybe, the Borg could control it, and it would be of a much greater benefit than it is a danger.
Absolutely. Like, what are the benefits that we could get out of this thing, and does that outweigh the danger? Like, if this one molecule has more power than a warp engine, like, what could they do with that? Like, they could They could go super fast and probably get home really quickly. And the fact that it is a perfect molecule and it is this holy symbol to the Borg, it's fascinating. Every aspect about this episode is completely fascinating.
The scene where Seven sees the molecule, as it stabilizes or whatever, is extremely well done. And they talk about it afterwards, and she describes her experience, and Janeway is like, it sounds to me like you had your first spiritual experience or whatever, spiritual awakening, whatever she says. And I find that to be really interesting for a number of reasons. They keep on comparing it to a religious experience. They bring in Chakotay's, visions and everything like that. And I think that it's interesting that they sort of make that comparison, and that for the Borg, the most spiritual experience of their lives is, it involves scientific perfection. I think that's really cool. And, hearing Seven talk about it in this episode, and I guess, credit where credit's due, because it's like, oh, Seven's saying this, but, it's actually the writer of the episode who's saying this, which is Lisa Klink. That hearing her talk about that, like, struck a chord with me, someone who's not at all a spiritual person, in a way that, people have been sort of like trying to get through to me for my entire life, in a sense. I mean, I don't know if that makes any sense, but like,
I agree. Like, I'm gonna relay a message here. Like, I know, I'm a Christian, and I've said it on the show before, right? And I struggle with my faith, and there's a lot of things that I struggle with when it comes to my faith and what I believe in. And I kind of get into like a mind warp where I start to think about something that I don't want to think about because it doesn't fit with what I understand. And a lot of people will simply dismiss that as, oh, well, whatever, that means there is no God. And for me, the thing that clicked and made me realize and made me accept that there was a God, for me, was the fact that Earth is the only planet in our solar system that can experience a solar eclipse. Because the size of our moon and the distance that it is from our planet makes it the exact same size as the sun because of its distance from our planet. And every other planet in our solar system either doesn't have a moon, or its moons are not the proper ratio to block the sun completely. And to me, that means there's got to be a God to make something like that happen on our planet. I'm sure there's people that are rolling their eyes as they listen to this, and they say, oh, it's just coincidence or whatever. But to me, it's more than a coincidence. And that was honestly the first brick that I needed to build my faith road.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and that's really interesting, and it sounds like that's kind of a similar thing to what Seven had here, in that it was like a scientific thing. I mean, for me, I've had that type of experience, but it hasn't made me think that there is like a God or anything like that. But it's like a moment of clarity where something which you believe in or whatever is sort of like crystallized. I mean, for me, it's happened watching movies, and I know that's going to sound extremely like whatever, it's so insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but my life revolves around movies. It's how I define myself, and there have been times where I've been sitting in a theater, only like 2 or 3 times in my entire life, where I've seen something on screen and I've been so overcome by the beauty of what I'm seeing that I think to myself, like, this is a perfect moment, and it is profound, and if I were to tell you the movies where I saw this, you would be like, you're insane, Mike, but that's the way it is. So,
was it Boogie Nights?
It wasn't Boogie Nights. I do think that Boogie Nights is the best movie ever, but I did not have that experience watching Boogie Nights. So,
right on. Should we move on to the next one, or can we keep talking about this?
We can move on to the next one because it's even better.
So, right on. In the Pale Moonlight. What's it about, Mike?
Sisko decides that he needs to bring Romulus into the war in order for the Federation to defeat the Dominion. And he starts going down a dark path involving deception which he needs to sort of come to terms with. Is it worth throwing away your morals and your ethics in order to serve the greater good? And hijinks ensue.
So I'm going to start by saying, okay, so I'm known across the network that I love the alternative factor. This episode is way better than the alternative factor.
I would agree with you on that.
In fact, this is my favorite episode of Star Trek right here.
There you go.
So, yeah. I like Duet is probably my second favorite episode of Star Trek, like hands down, but this is my favorite. And the way that this is written, the way that this is directed, the story in it, and how the elements work. And like I could never in a million years write this episode, and how brilliantly it works to have Sisko working with Garak. And Garak, from step one, when you go back and watch this episode, Garak knew exactly what he had to do, and it took him no time at all to come up with the solution to this puzzle, where he says, okay, I need this chip. This chip, I need to fake something on it that they will never believe. However, if I kill this guy in an explosion, it'll create enough errors in it that they'll believe that it's simply because of the explosion. Like, I believe that Garak knew this whole A to B, A to B, B to C, C to D, as soon as he was talking with Sisko.
Yeah, this episode is great. I mean, Star Trek Deep Space Nine is known to going to some for going to some very dark places, and this is as dark as it gets. And I think that it's extremely well done, and it really does sort of ask some really, really hard questions, kind of like what we were talking about yesterday with Inquisition. And I think that the answers are very, very interesting, and they really stick with you, and they really make you think about what you would do and whether or not the ends justify the means. And this, to me, is sort of the heart of what Deep Space Nine is. And I also think that the way that the story is told is very, very interesting and outside of the box in terms of Star Trek. It's with the sort of narration to the camera, almost breaking the fourth wall. It's very well done, and I think that it kind of represents what Deep Space Nine is, all in the span of 45 minutes.
Yeah, you got it. One of the things that I really like in this episode, and I like watching, is the relationship between Sisko and Dax in this episode, because, he's going to her for advice because of the relationship that he's had with her and with Curzon over the past however many years of their friendship. When he's in the holosuite and he's punching that bag and he's trying to, argue his point in his office, and Dax is calmly counter-arguing him. Like, it sums up their relationship perfectly, I think. And it's the opposite end of the argument that he had with her in Rejoined, back when she was wanting to leave the Federation to go and live with this woman that she loved because she was married to him previously. And it's like, well, they play off each other, and they're an anchor for each other that they can go back to time and time again to help them get focused. And so that's another really great aspect about this episode that I like a lot. It builds on that character, that character relationship as well. Yeah.
I really do think that this is the best episode of Deep Space Nine. And hey, it's named after a random line from Tim Burton's Batman, so that makes it cool too. And just one thing that I want to point out here, just to sort of like put a bow on today. We've talked about how great the Omega Directive and In the Pale Moonlight both are. Both of these episodes were directed by the same guy, Victor Lobo. So, yay, Victor Lobo, for some fine television. This was a good week for Victor Lobo, apparently. But yeah.
Right on. I'll tie my own little bow on it here. So the guy that played Vreenak, Stephen McHattie. So you and I had the fortune of talking about The Expanse way back at the beginning of this. And I'm just going to remind people, just in case you haven't gone back and seen it yet. So Stephen McHattie, he's a great Canadian actor. He played Vreenak in here. He played that alien with the breathing problem in The Expanse, which I can't remember that character's name now, but he was so awesome in it. But go and see Pontypool. It's the coolest zombie, not zombie movie you'll ever see, and it takes place basically in a radio station, and that's it. And he's in it, and he's got such a great voice, and he plays a radio DJ in it. So Pontypool, go check it out. It's great stuff.
All right, well, I guess that pretty much wraps up today. Brandon, where can people find you on the internet?
Well, you can find me here on the network with new episodes of Melodic Treks, which is all about the music of Star Trek. You can find me every once in a while poking my head up in the Babel Conference, and you can find me on Twitter at Brandon Mutala. And Mike, where can people find you when you're not killing Romulan senators?
You can find me right here on Trek FM doing Stage 9, where we talk about the people who make Star Trek, and you can also find me on Twitter at Mumbles3K. And we will be back tomorrow with 2 more episodes of Star Trek, Unforgettable and His Way.